reminder, the sessions for PowerPlex are now up. The recordings are, and this session is an offshoot of a session that our own Ken Keller did. So Ken joined us about a year ago. He's been a Plex project manager for many years. In fact, he's actually worked with Plex longer than just about anybody I know, and we were really delighted to bring him on board. He's going to talk in more detail about specific ways to handle rejections, not just accounting focus. So Ken, I'm going to let you take it away, and I'm going to mute myself. So thank you.
As I was saying, this was a presentation, an offshoot of a presentation given at PowerPlex 2020. In that, myself and Zach Farley, our own Zach Farley from Control+M, we focused on rejection control and the impacts in accounting for rejection control. And I was thinking of two different ways to take this, this session today. One was get into all those complexities, the mysteries of rejection control. It is a monstrous module that integrates with numerous other modules in Plex, and therefore, you know, has more that can go wrong if it's not configured correctly. So the objective of today's presentation is to just decode rejection control and break it down to its most basic functions. And rejection control can actually be quite simple. And so what I'm going to show you today may not work for everyone that's on this call. You may need some of those complexities that we talked about. You may need some of the approval processes and MRBs and all the rest as a part of your system. But I want to breaking down and decoding rejection control, those are all kind of add-ons. I just want to talk about the very basic functions that take place, and they are usable. And for some customers, the quick and simple is the best solution. And so with that, I want to begin the presentation here. I'm a big fan of all of those conspiracy theory shows, the Decoded shows, the Ancient Aliens, all of those. I hate to admit that I watch those, but I do. And rejection control can seem like at times this mysterious thing that was either created or used by aliens. The objective here again is to decode it, to break it down, and to prove that it's really quite simple, whether it was developed by aliens or not. Our agenda today is to talk about rejection control. What is it exactly? I'm not sure that all of you are using rejection control. Maybe you've tried it, it hasn't worked for you. Maybe you're using it now, but you know it's too complex. Or maybe you're using it now and it's working just fine, but you want to know what else you can do. Hopefully you're all going to get something out of this presentation. The one thing that we didn't talk about in the PowerPlex session was setup and configuration. How do we get started? How do I begin using the system? And how do I just get the basic setting and configuration in my PCN? A lot of you, when your PCNs were created or were copied from other template PCNs, they came with a certain configuration that might be in conflict with your actual process. I'm going to show you today the very basic settings, setup tables, and considerations for setup to get you started with the basic concept of rejection control. We're going to talk about quick rejections. These are lightning fast. My understanding is they were developed for very quick processes. Think Laverne and Shirley with the bottle going down the line in the bottling plant. When you pull that rejected container off the line, or even rejected piece out of a container off the line, going through the full rejection control system can be quite cumbersome and time wasting, I guess I would call it, time consuming, let's put it that way. And so a quick rejection form was created, and it is lightning fast. And then we want to talk about rejection jobs. How do we take a defective thing and make it good again? And how do we do so again in its very basic form? And then we'll have a question session at the end, and we'll unmute you then when you ask the questions. But the other objective that I had for this call is that we keep it short and simple. My mind was mush after PowerPlex last week. I was energized, ready to get back at it, but I'm still recovering. I'll be perfectly honest with you, and I'm thinking maybe some of you are feeling the same. So we'll keep it light today. So rejection control, what is it exactly? Rejection control is called the rejection list in Classic, and we use it to process defective material. More importantly, to define the steps for processing and to take defective material and convert it to usable material or to scrap it out. And if you saw the presentation that we gave at PowerPlex, we did have kind of a prerequisite discussion about what is defective reject and what is scrap. And when it comes to scrap, just know that that is something that is not reusable. We can't make it good again. It's going in the trash. Here today, we're going to be talking about defects and rejections, things that we could make good again, or we're going to eventually scrap them. We can also use the rejection control system to analyze rejections, to do investigations, to link causes to those so that we can do corrective actions, and more importantly, just track what kind of rejections do we have, and look at those over a month period, a year to date, look at them by part number, by supplier, by work center. And then I pulled this right out of Plex. I don't like to read the bullet points, but I am going to read this one word for word. So with rejection control, we can manage the complexities of processing inventory through special inspection, sorting, rework operations, and scrap. And the reason I'm reading that is that comes directly out of Plex and out of the wiki and out of the Knowledge Center. And so I didn't want to kind of reuse their words, but you can see that even Plex throws in there that manage the complexities. The objective is this session today is to tell you that there aren't as many complexities as you may think in order to get started. You may add those complexities later to make it match your process. All right, so where does it all begin? Rejection control begins simply with a container status that is set up and configured in such a way that that status has the defective flag checked. If inventory is created or moved to a status that has that defective flag checked, so in your PCNs, it might be called defective, it might be called hold, it might be called suspect or other. Anything that has that defective flag will show up on the rejection list. So any serial number, any container that has a container status which has the defective flag check will show up in rejection control. So those of you that are changing statuses from okay to defective or hold or suspect, even though you might not be using rejection control, it's working in the background. Plex is placing those containers on the rejection control system, and it really is that simple. And in that case, how do containers come off the rejection list? Well, they simply come off the rejection list when you change the status back to something that does not have the defective flag checked on it. And when it comes to rejection control, when we process rejection jobs that we'll talk about today, when we process quick rejections, that's really all we're doing. We're changing the status to defective, and we're removing that status to something that is not marked as defective. And it really is that simple. On the rejection control screen, it simply shows containers in a defective status. And so here you'll see a listing of serial numbers that are marked as defective. If you are using the very simple version of rejection control, which is just simply a list to show you all the containers that are currently marked in a defective status, you can just send simple nightly email notifications to your quality team, to people that need to process these and understand that, hey, these things were marked as defective. And so they can come to, it's a one-stop shopping. We can come to one list rather than have to filter our inventory screens to look for these things. It's one-stop shopping to show all the defective containers, active defective containers in my inventory. And like I said, it can send nightly email notifications. The rejection control screen for some of you who may have tried to implement rejection control on your own, you'll see that when a reject number gets created, when you start processing a serial number or multiple serial numbers, you'll see a reject number and potentially some kind of exclamation point next to that, just stating that there is something out of whack, something out of sync. And oftentimes this is where people stop with rejection control. They're like, nope, there's something wrong, something really strange and weird going on in the system, and I don't want to do the investigation to see how do I fix this thing. Well, fixing it is actually rather simple. So if we go back to our original discussion, that container statuses with defective flags create those serial numbers on the reject list. And if we begin to process them in any way, shape, or form, a rejection number is created. All we have to do is take those containers, mark them as not defective, so change the status either directly in the rejection control system or outside of the rejection control system. There are other screens that would allow us to do that, container status being one. We remove those containers then from the rejection list. The rejection itself may still be active, but there's a simple active flag on those that can be removed as well. So getting rid of these errors is actually quite simple as well. And so for those of you that are using rejection control, I would encourage you to kind of look out there and see if you have any old, you can see this is a demo website, but we've got a really old rejection out there that just needs to be cleaned up. All right. Again, trying not to read the words directly from the slide, but these come more or less right from Plex instructions. And if you're going to begin this simple method, I just want to make sure that you're using this simple method. So an inventory container can be changed to defective various ways on several inventory screens. If you are going into the container form to change the status, I would advise you to stop and look for some of those other inventory screens that could be used. There's a simple reject container screen that can do this. The quick rejection screens can do it, and we're gonna show that again today. The container status screen, there are mobile screens that can do that, and the reason you want to use those is then you don't have to worry about locking down all the various fields on the container form itself. So if somebody has access to change the status, it's likely they have access to change quantity, even part number, operation. So it's a little dangerous there to be changing the status on the form itself. Something to look at following this presentation. And rejections are processed using either a 2- or 3-step process. It can also be a 4-step process if we bring the MRB process into this. But since this presentation is really talking about the most simple ways to use the rejection control system, I'm not going to include those multi-step processes. So step 1, assign, simply assigns a reject number, a rejection number, to the container or multiple containers of that part number, and the actions that need to take place to correct or scrap the containers. And then there's a do function, step 2, where a person assigned could perform the actual functions, okay? And either rework the parts to change the status back to an okay status or scrap or such. There is a step 3, an approval process that is, if it's absolutely needed, you want to have somebody from your quality team approve a container after it's been processed. There needs to be further discussion. We could change, add a 3rd approval step, but there are a couple methods in Plex to get rid of that approval step if you want to go do this quickly. So we're going to get into the setup and configuration now. There is one primary setting that determines the processing method that I've just talked about. Many of you probably have the 3-step assign, do, approve value set on the setting called rejection processing mode. You'll see here in the description it says do not modify the choices. I believe that's a message actually to Plex employees not to modify that because it makes drastic changes to a customer processing of rejections. But some of the available options here are sort container, which simply means no rework jobs, no 2-step approval. When we create a rejection, it just simply goes to the sort container action where we remove the good from the bad, or the bad from the good, and process that way. You can see that there is the 3-step and even the 3-step plus MRB approval, which I'll call a 4-step process. Today we're going to be talking about the 3-step or the 2-step, the most simple processes. The primary settings, and really the only settings that would be required to use the most simple solution in rejection control, are those that are showing on this screen. And as Patty said, this presentation will be provided to you at the end of this. We'll give you a link to our YouTube channel where you can actually watch the presentation again or share it with other team members who were unable to attend. But this presentation today, talking about the most simple process, the rejection processing mode, which I just discussed, I would recommend starting simply the 2 or 3 step process. Rejection job use needs to be on in order to use rejection jobs. The create job for rework status only, turn that off. Allow selective approvals on, scrap from rejection on. This one is key, the scrap method from form setting. I would highly recommend using the scrap pieces method. So if we're going to scrap from a rejection form, it's saying, do we scrap the whole container or do we scrap pieces from the container? You can still scrap the full container if you choose the scrap pieces option, but that's the one that I would recommend. Turn off rejection type use, turn on restore original job on approval, turn on the check for suspect status. And if using quick rejections, you want a label to print for both the container that you're splitting from, and you'll see how that works here in a moment, and for the label for the container that you're marking as rejected, then you're going to want to turn that setting on to print labels for both the source container that you're splitting rejects from and the new container that gets created when you use quick rejections. Some key considerations, and this was highlighted in our PowerPlex presentation. The rework operation cannot be the first step in the routing. It will not work. And so oftentimes, if you try using rejection controls or rework jobs, that rework operation placed in the process routing, if it's that first step, things just aren't going to work. We want to include the approved work center in your rework step. So when the rework job is assigned, we know where to perform this. And then finally, it's also recommended not to dump the rework operation just simply at the end of the routing. Zach highlighted some accounting issues that occur when that takes place in our presentation. So we're now to the part of the presentation where I want to talk about quick rejections. And then this screen easily rejects parts from one container and sorts it into another all in one step. The instruction for those is highlighted here so you can see how easy this is. We access the quick rejections form. We type or scan the serial number to reject. Scanning makes it that much easier. We specify the location. Again, if we're in a location like QA as we're doing this, we can actually scan a barcoded label for that as well. We specify a defect type that comes from our defect table. And if you're not using defects currently, just know that those are found in the problem control module. Those of you that aren't using advanced quality would still have access to it, but that's just where problem control and rejections use the same defect table. It's a screen, and it's called problem control defects in the UX environment. We would enter a rejection quantity and then click the OK button. So you can see it's really a quick process for handling and handling rejections, hence the name. Now, classic users, if you're looking in your rejection menu, you may not find it. This is a Vision Plex screen found in the Vision Plex screen list. It's called Quick Rejection Form, and a menu node can be created from that VP screen. If you need to know how to do that, shoot me an email after this presentation or ask the question at the end, and I'll make sure that you get those instructions for how to add those menu nodes in the classic environment. So let's fly into Plex right now. I'm going to come out of the presentation, go right into Plex, and hope this all works out and we don't have the bugs that we did at the start of the presentation to show you the quick rejection form. So I'm going to go right into Plex here, and we're going to go into the quick rejections form. So excuse me, do some housekeeping here. Oh, come on. Sorry, let me move this. There here's my problem. All right, so in our rejection tracking module, you'll see this quick rejection detail screen. Just like I showed in my slide, it's really 4 things that we need to provide to Plex. We need to provide a serial number, a location, a defect type, and a quantity. So in this case, I'm just going to type in a serial number. Give it a location. And if we're doing these rejections in the quality area, maybe in a quarantine area, makes it nice. We can just scan a location that's on the label in that area. We would choose the defect type coming from that table called Problem Control Defects in UX, and we'll give it a quantity. Now, the quantity will be the quantity of rejections from this serial number. So if this serial number holds, let's say, 10 pieces, I'm telling Plex how many of those pieces are going to be rejected. Remember that image of Laverne and Shirley, for those of you that are old enough to remember that show? You know, those bottles going down the assembly line, we're pulling 2 off or 3 off. We're saying these are rejects, and we're creating a reject number for those, and we're processing those through quickly. So in this case, I'm going to say that we have 2 coming out of this container that are going to go into the quick rejection. I'm going to click the OK button. And we're going to chew on that for a second. And there was a little green tab there that I couldn't read fast enough, but it told me the serial number that those 2 were split into. So now let's just go into inventory. So we'll go into the inventory screen, and I'm going to look at that original serial number. S001407 was, oops, sorry, what am I doing? In my serial number, S001407. And I don't see it. Why is that? And the reason for that is, sorry, I'm going to move this out of the way. It's no longer in my active inventory. So here it is. I see it. I see the job that it was on. I can see that it has 0 quantity. So I want to drill into it, look at the in history to see what happened to that. So I can see that I only had 2 in this container when I split this, actually, during the during my quick rejection. So it changed 1407 down to quantity of 0 and moved it. And so it created a new serial number. So if I go into inventory, this is actually, let's go back. Look at my traceability tree. There's that whole thing there. And I can see that 1407 actually became 1410. All right. So I'm going to go back into my inventory screen and look for my active inventory, 1410. And there's my inventory. It's changed to a status of allocated. That's just the way we have our system configured. We can, through the container status setup table, we can actually create another status, but it's allocated to a job 849 that is part of a rework job. So let's go to the rejection system, the rejection control, and take a look at that rejection. Now, having the quick rejections turned on with the method that I chose, I can see that rejection number 42, which is inactive, was the serial number that split from 1410. So there's my rejected quantity of 2. The one that was remaining was the 1410 that's now sitting out there in my inventory, and that's quick rejection. So imagine that I'm adding all of these defect types. I now have the ability to, through the rejection system, keep track of the number of defects that I have in a very quick reject process. All right. Let's talk about processing via rejection jobs. The best way to rework rejected containers is to use the jobs which were run on the control panel initially. So let's say we're through the first 2 operations. We find at the end of that operation, either through a check sheet or from visual inspection or even a quality inspection that's taking place at the end of that line, that we need to do some type of rework to get this thing back so we can run it back through the process and make it good again, make the defective good again. So in order to do that, we would reject the containers on the control panel if we knew that we were producing defective parts at that time, or we could use the reject container screen to change the status, and I'll show you that in a moment. But once we've rejected the container by simply changing the status of that container from an OK status to a status marked as defective, it shows up in the rejection list. We would go to the assign screen, assign a rejection number, scrap containers, or edit the rejection. We can assign rework operations to the rejection job as long as I have a rework operation in my process routing. We highly suggest the use of the auto approve to make this simple. And then we choose that rework job from the control panel dispatch list and run the rework job on the control panel. And as Zach and I stated in our PowerPlex presentation, there are various accounting impacts for each one of these processes, and I'll refer you back to those if you have those type of questions. So let's fly right into Plex again, and let's talk about rework jobs. So in this case, I'm going to go back into my inventory, and I'm going to look at a serial number, S001403. I can see that in my active inventory. I've got a quality of 9 out there. It's assigned to job number 850. It's in an OK status. If I look at that, I can see from the container history screen, I can see that it was produced at the kitchen stove. It started with 0, and then we produced 10. There was a split container that took place on this thing, and it's now, so we've got 9 in that container. So if I just simply change the status, and remember there are multiple other screens to do this. I'm going to do the way I told you not to do it. I'm going to go ahead and change this status to defective simply because I'm here. And also to show you the danger of doing such a thing, because if I have access to do this, I can reassign a heat number. I can change the part number, reassign the operation. There are permissions in UX, actually security, that would allow me to do certain fields and not others, and that exists to a certain extent, maybe not as robust in Classic, but the danger of changing statuses here is great because of all these other things, and it adds complexity to the process because you simply have to manage permissions at the field level rather than at the form level or the application level. So in this case, I've simply changed container number 1403 to a defective status, and I click OK. I've got to give it a defect type, in this case, inspection bad, and the record's been updated, and 1403 now is more in a defective status. So easy to see this way, but not the proper way to do it. So now I can go back to my rejection screen, and called Rejection Control in UX. While I'm here, let me just show you this. So I showed you the wrong way. This would be the right way. So the right way to do such a thing, here we got a serial number. This is called the Reject Container screen. It's a very simple screen to put a container into a defective status outside of what I did. So I'm going to say, let's do 1408, even better yet, 1411. I'm going to change the status to defective, give it a defect type. I can add something here, so we'll call it reject container. This is the container form, so it could show up on labels, could show up in my inventory as the container note. We could add instructions here if we would want. Details for somebody that needs to process this thing through. But you can see I went to a screen called Reject Container. I scanned a serial number, marked it as defective. I could here choose the responsible supplier as well, and I click OK, and it has simply changed that status to defective for that. So that's the proper way to reject a container, I believe. But let's go back into the rejection control system, and I'm just going to hit search here. And what we're looking for, there is my serial number 1403 that I just rejected today. So we're gonna assign a rejection job to it. So I'm going to highlight it, and I want to click the create button. Clicking the create button simply gives me a reject number. So I've just created a rejection, and I can now begin to create a rejection job for this. I can choose to assign check sheets. If there are any check sheets for this part number, I can choose to assign those here or not. If there were multiple containers of this part number that were also in defective statuses, I could choose to combine those here into one rejection job. So these become the source containers of the rejection job. I have this one selected, so I don't need to select anything else. The defect is, the status is defective. I could change it there. I could change the type here. I could add additional information. I can add container notes and special instructions to this one as well. But all I'm going to do is say, yep, I'm going to attach this container. So I've created this, and now it's looking at my inspection, so I don't really need to do that. So I have just created reject number 44, which is now on rejection job number 851. So now I need to assign this thing. It's important if we want to make this simple, to use the auto approve OK containers. So as we run this rejection job or this rework job back through the control panel, I want to say anything that I run through is good. Now I will have the opportunity on the control panel to mark it defective as well, or to scrap on the control panel. So there's other things that I can do, but this auto approve OK containers will auto close the rejection when I run the rejection job. I can return to operation, and this return to operation is found on the process routing of the part. So in this case, we're looking at a part called breakfast. So if I went to my, my process routing screen, and I looked at the part number called breakfast, sorry. You can see there's my rework or sort operation. It's not the first and not the last operation. And if I drill into that operation, you can see that I've got a return part operation assigned. So if I go back, I want to perform my rework on my sort operation. I want to approve after this op so that it comes back into its wherever I'm stating that it needs to go. And I click OK. There was an error. What did I do? Oh, I got to give it a number. Thanks, Plex. All right, what you see here is a label that's spitting out for that. And if we look at this number 44, I can see that I've got an action out here that is actually at the control panel, and it's on job number 851. So I would now go out to the work center, in this case, the kitchen stove. This is the work center that's assigned to that operation in the process routing for the part. I'm logged in as operator. I'm already in production status just for speed here. And what I need to do is find job number 851. Okay. Don't have any containers loaded, so there's something going on here. This is key to note. We want to clear our setup before we do that. And now I want to oh, great. The wonder of live presentations. So I've got an issue here, worked this morning in test, where my job is not pulling in my source container. So my source container that I just created the rework job from is not producing. So I've got to go here, find it, and there it is. So I'm just loading. I'm going to start my new container. Again, I'm running job 851. I would enter my production number. Let's see, 10 here. Record production. In this case, it's going to say it's overproducing. And I've got record production here. Yes. I've got insufficient source, so I have enough to make 9. There we go. Those are the 9 that were in my rejection. So I'm going to change this to 9. So the container that I loaded was the original 9 that I rejected. It's now loaded. I can produce 9. I can record production for my 9, and I can mark my container full. And I have no more yield. Now my check sheet can appear, and I can fill out my check sheet stating that, yep, everything was good on my rejected container. And that is the rejection job. Sorry for the little hiccup there. So conclusions, to keep the act of rejecting containers simple, use the quick rejection screen to create the rejection itself. It rejects pieces from a container. It creates a rejection number. It actually even creates a new serial number in a defective status that does show up on the rejection list. Use the reject container screen just simply for a security standpoint instead of the container form to mark your containers as defective because all you're doing is changing the status there and moving it to a location. Likely, it could stay in the same location. You can, however, there's multiple settings and configurations available to you. Everyone on this call probably has a different configuration for rejections, whether you're using it or not. But the settings and configurations that I've shown in this presentation are the most simple just to get started to do the actions that I showed. Use auto-approve rejections where at all possible. And finally, if you have any questions, you want to know the impacts of what I've shown today when it comes to accounting, or maybe see some of the other methods that I didn't show in this presentation, like sort container, feel free to go to perplexing.com. Session's still out there. View the broadcast for the session called Handling Rejections and Reworks for Operations and Accounting, and view those there. And I'm pretty sure that I can get you a hard copy too if you would need such a thing. And that's it. That is my presentation for today. After we'll go through some quick questions here. We're about 45 minutes in. We'll take a few questions, and then we want to tell you about our next session. So I'll open it up to questions now.
And is there a way to basically reject from the control panel rather than scrap from the control panel?
There is a way. Now, this is going to be more difficult answering the question, so you'll have to believe me on these answers, but because your configuration might be completely different than our configuration. But absolutely, yes, there are ways for us to allow our operators to, when we produce, to tell Plex what status we're producing in. So all we really need to do is change the status of the container that we are producing to one that has the defective flag checked, and you have now just placed that container on the rejection list.
Okay, so inside of the manage...
Manage setup, LB.
Yep, got it.
Yep. Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, on the rejection list, there's this
Yes.
defective date field. Where does that come from? Where is that in the SQL tables?
Ooh, when you start talking SQL, then I really am talking about the aliens and the mysteries of the cosmos here. I'm going to defer to Patty and see if she's been down that road either. I can certainly get back to you on that, Liam, but go ahead, Patty.
Liam, in true pass the buck fashion, that's not my forte either, but if you email me, I will get it to the person who can answer. She's not all right now, but she'll answer right away. I promise you that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
You don't ever want me to.
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that, Liam.
Do you know if it is the date that the status changed that shows up in that field?
It likely is because remember, in very simple form, in its most simple form, the rejection control system is simply the changing of a container to a status that's marked as defective. So if that's the date that the rejection takes place, then I would assume that that's correct. But I think we want to get you the right answer. So let's put that down as an assumption that I think that's correct, Liam. But we'll get back to you on that.
Ken, you've got a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you're watching that.
I am not. Let's see if I can get
from Daisy.
to.
Heidi
Okay.
and Joseph.
Yeah, so I can talk about it. In our process, we have multiple containers gathered all together into a master unit. Is there a way for that? Is there a capability there for the rejection part where you can type in a master?
There is.
Okay.
There is, yeah. So you can reject a master unit. It rejects all containers that are on that master unit. It's just not the configuration that I had set up in the demo today, trying to keep it simple, but because now we're adding some complexities. But yeah, there is a way to reject master units.
Okay, perfect. And one more question. How about a time frame? So if there is, let's say that we want to put something on hold from 1 p.m. to 1:30 that was produced during that time. Is there a way to do that too?
Wow, great. I don't know that I've been confronted with that question before. I understand the concept. I don't know if that capability exists. And this is Daisy, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, Daisy, yeah, if you can email that to either Patty or I, or I'm writing it, I'm making sure that I get it now. We'll get you that answer because that's a real cool idea if it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's just one that I'm not aware of, and that happens for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah,
I see.
Andy?
Yes, Andy.
Hi, I am wondering about rejection RMA from a customer. So there's a rejection of a product that comes back.
Yep.
Defective status.
Correct. So
you've gone through the process of job where it appears to be manufacturing job. So how do we handle it from that beginning? So
on the container status form, there is a flag there that says this is the return status for customer returns. And as long as that status also has the defective flag checked, when that product comes back from a customer, it will be placed in the status, let's call it returned. And as long as it's defective, meaning the flag is also checked for defective, it will show up on the rejection list where it needs to be processed. And so again, adding more complexities, but quite possible to do. And it's just it's a flag in the container status setup table called return status, and you just check that and make sure it also has the defective flag checked. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What does the setting rejection type table set to on cause? Meaning, so that's from Heidi. So you saw that in my slide to not turn on the rejection type table. Simply, it adds additional functionality and makes these processes quite manual. Beyond that, a lot of the implications and ramifications and results would be dependent upon other settings or setting conflicts within your PCN. So Heidi, that's something we can discuss. If you want to shoot that to us in an email. Again, I'm writing it down here, making sure that we get back to you on that. But I think I would just need to know a lot more about your PCN and some of the setting configuration. All right, and it looks like Joseph might be asking the same question as Daisy about the way to calculate quantities rejected and removed from a rejection for a time period. I will try to answer both those questions together because I think they would have similar results. All right, Patty, I don't see any other questions in the chat here.
I have another question.
Sure.
So currently, we often have parts get rejected as part of a quality control process, but then the reject reason becomes a process control variable for earlier processes in our manufacturing line. And one of the problems we have now is that parts can sometimes have multiple defects, and the operator will just pick one when they're rejecting the part. Is there a way to record multiple defect codes for a single container that we're rejecting, or is there a better way to collect defect data to use for process control?
Great question. So the answer is really no. On the container form, there's only one defect that is possible to be selected. However, if you use the quick rejections form, which you saw split containers for the quantity that you told Plex to split, you could split a quantity under one defect, split another quantity under the other defect, and you would have then containers with a single defect assigned, but they're still representative of the defect types that you've selected. Another option, and I don't know that it would work in this case, but if you're not using it, maybe you want to try it, is something called the defect detail. So it's a setting that I didn't have turned on in my demo, but when you select the defect type with the setting turned on to use defect detail, it brings up a subcategory of that defect type. So a good example would be the defect type is, let's say, paint problems. And the defect detail would be another list where you could select things like, well, it has orange peel, or it's missing paint, or it has overspray, or it's not cured, it's still wet, you know, whatever those things might be. That's something that is available to you too, that isn't often used, and again, adds some complexities, but it's there. It's in that in UX problem control defect screen or table, and then in Classic, I think it's found also in the problem control menu, but it is just simply called defects and defect details.
And does defect detail allow you to select multiple defect details?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't remember that it does, but it just further classifies maybe. If it does, that's great, but I don't remember that it does. Yeah, so in that case, maybe use of the quick rejections might be the best. So you're splitting off individual containers, and I'll follow up on these things for you too. So, and again, who's this? I'm sorry.
Liam Clegg from Copen.
Okay. Hi, Liam. Thanks. I need to look at my screen here. Okay. Yeah, I'll get back with you. So we've got just 5 minutes left, and I want to talk about our next session. Feel free to contact Patty or myself if you want to. If you have further questions, and my email is pretty easy. It's ken@control.m.solutions, so no .com or anything like that, just ken@control.m.solutions. Our next continuing Plex education session is going to be May 25th on preventative maintenance. I believe around Danielle Gaios is going to be giving that presentation on how to set up maintenance, how to create maintenance tasks, maintenance checklists, PM schedules, custom recurring schedules, work requests that appear at the control panel or can be, created at the control panel and sent automatically to maintenance, the creation of PMs, and then how to complete those. So use of the work request screen and various filtering options, how to generate new PMs upon completion, so like follow-up tasks, and the implementation of work request workflow. I would love to attend this one myself. So just wanted to make sure that you're available.
Ken, one little change, it's going to be the week of May 25th. So I don't want anyone to think it's going to be on Monday. It's that week. So just want to clarify that and to thank you, Ken, for this great information this week. I think there's probably folks who would love to dive in even deeper to rejections. Every time I train on rejections, we just get more and more people involved because they've got so many unique requirements. So thanks.
Yeah.
On a side note, we've gotten some feedback from you on future sessions. We really appreciate it. Please know that we're considering a number of factors when we schedule these sessions. This includes not only the number of people asking for it, but also who's available on our team to deliver. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want me delivering a session on quality. So if I'm the only one available, it's pretty likely it's not going to be quality. I mean, eventually we'll get to all of them, and we're sure glad to know everybody's interested. So please share this with everyone you know in the community. There's no charge. We just want to make everybody stronger. So stay safe and healthy, friends, and stay in touch. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.